Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining me here today to hear about our work that we've been doing on industrial hemp. I'm Tara Caton, and I'm the research coordinator here at the Rodale Institute. And I've been working a lot on the industrial hemp research, and I'm really excited to tell you about that today. Just a few things to note. I am recording here from a hotel room. I'm actually at a conference presenting the same work, so I apologize for any poor quality in video. But I'm really excited to be able to join in remotely here from Arizona and tell you about our work that we've been doing. You guys can hear me and see me, as well as my PowerPoint, but I cannot hear or see you. If you have any questions throughout the talk, please feel free to use the Q&A function to type your question in. And at the end of the talk, I will take time to answer the more general questions to the audience, and we'll go through those. If you have any more specific questions, my last slide will be email addresses that you can contact for more specific questions or questions about your specific farm or plan. We have a service for that as well. So with that, I'm going to get started and tell you about industrial hemp. And how we think it's a versatile crop with the potential to improve agroecosystem diversity, mitigate environmental degradation, and increase farm income. So here at the Rodale Institute, for those of you that are not familiar, we are a nonprofit research and education farm in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. We have 333 acres that include both production, research, trials, labs, offices, and classrooms. All of the work we do is solutions-based research to help farmers and to make the connection from our soil to our food and our people. And this is our mission that was written on a chalkboard by our founder, J.I. Rodale, in 1947, that healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. In the work we've started with industrial hemp, we really believe that can explain this link from going from our soil and ultimately ending in the health of the people and the planet. In 2017, Rodale Institute was one of 16 organizations to begin research on industrial hemp in Pennsylvania as part of the Pennsylvania Department of Ag Research Industrial Hemp Pilot Program. And so we were really excited to be one of the organizations to be part of the inaugural planting of hemp in Pennsylvania for more than 50 years. And we were the only group that was not affiliated with the university, and we are the only one that started with an attempt to cultivate industrial hemp under organic management. We know that industrial hemp has a long-standing history with many uses for food, fiber, and medicine. And more recently, some of the fields are CBD production, as well as things like bioplastics. It is thought that industrial hemp has over 25,000 uses. Again, we know there's a long-standing history of industrial hemp. We know that it dates back very far. It's one of the oldest crops, and it's used for things like cordage and clothing, sails. But due to the marijuana tax of 1937, production decreased greatly. Though there was a short time during World War II that it was actually required in most areas, and especially in Pennsylvania, for farmers to grow hemp on their land to produce supplies. But then in 1970, industrial hemp, because of its close relationship to the marijuana plant, became listed on the Controlled Substance Act and the Schedule I narcotic list. But in 2016, some language in the Farm Bill allowed states to begin pilot programs to start researching industrial hemp as a crop again. And so, like I said, in 2017, Rodale Institute was one of 16 organizations in Pennsylvania, as well as many other states began these programs to begin planting industrial hemp again. And then the 2018 Farm Bill put language in there to actually take industrial hemp off the Schedule I narcotic list. So now it is a legal crop, And it still requires permitting through the pilot programs through each state. So it's still state regulated, but you're able to grow it and cultivate it with all other crops. So with our research, so we really wanted to take hemp. We wanted to take this and treat it like any other crop. We wanted to be able to bring this crop and learn as much as we could about it and allow it to be inserted into farmers' already existing farm plans rather than reinventing the wheel. And so because of what we know about hemp, we know that it has the potential to grow pretty much anywhere, grow very tall, and also create this extensive root biomass underground. So we're looking at using industrial hemp as a dual weed suppression cover crop and a cash crop within an organic grain rotation that includes things like corn, soybean, and wheat. And again, because of this growth habit, because we know it can grow so tall and produce this extensive root biomass, we also thought that we might be able to use industrial hemp to create more of a no-till system. And so we are attempting to use industrial hemp not only in a grain rotation, but in a no-till grain rotation. A little bit more on rotational no-till for those of you that are not familiar. We know that continuous organic no-till is a challenge, but it is the main, tillage is the main tool for organic farmers to fight weeds. There are some options for reducing your tillage because we know that tillage can be detrimental to the both soil physical and biological structure. And so you're basically with tillage and with increased tillage, you're disrupting the biological community that is underground, that is providing many benefits to the soil and to the plants. And you're also increasing things like compaction, which affects water infiltration and runoff. So there's a few things you can do. You can rotate your annual crops with perennials. You could also just decrease the total amount of soil inversion that you are doing. So using other pieces of equipment like a chisel plow rather than a moldboard plow, which is going less deep in your soil pan. You could also use the rotational no-till approach. So this is something that we use a lot it's one of our systems in our farming systems trial, which for those of you that don't know is our longest running trial. It started in 1981, and it's the longest running side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional grain cropping in North America. And so we, in 2008, adopted no-till practices and rotational no-till approach in our farming systems trial. And so this is where you are terminating your cover crop with a roller crimper and planting directly behind. And this is what that looks like. I'm going to zoom in on that. So you can see in the front, you have a roller crimper, which is a steel rod that has chevron-shaped ridges that break the cover crop stem in 2 places, ensuring termination, and then seamlessly planting your cash crop behind with a grain drill. And so it's a seamless process. It's creating this natural mulch in it, and this system also replaces other things like black plastic. This is what our typical 4-year cash grain rotation looks like, and this is one we've been using in the farming systems trial for quite some time. We do also incorporate other crops in there like hay to increase diversity through the organic rotation. But this is typically what you'll see, and this is where you have a mixture of large grains and small grains, and where you are roller crimping rye to plant soybean and roller crimping vetch that's fixing nitrogen to plant corn. But in this case, this system still requires tillage to establish the rye, the vetch, the oats, and the wheat. And it's for these smaller grains, you're requiring this tillage to get a good seed to soil contact, to get that good cover, to provide the benefits that a cover crop provides, like suppressing weeds and holding on to soil. There are 2 options, including hemp, in this rotation. You can replace oats in the rotation, or you can replace corn. And this is thought because we know that it grows similarly to corn. It grows very tall, and it's a heavy nitrogen feeder. In this case, we went with option number 1 because it's kind of hard to convince Pennsylvania farmers and other farmers to eliminate corn out of their rotation. And it's quite easier to convince them to eliminate organic oats. And so we just decided to go with this option. Also, we were concerned about the fertility loss with growing hemp 2 seasons in a row, like you would corn. And in this case, rye does not need to be established by tillage. At least that's the thought, that rye would not need to be established by tillage because of having hemp in the rotation before your soybeans. So our experimental design, we're really just at the beginning stages here. We're only in year 3 of being able to grow hemp in Pennsylvania. So we wanted to start simple with the variety trial, just looking at what varieties we could get access to from different countries that never stopped growing, mainly from Europe and Canada. And so we're taking both fiber, seed, and dual purpose varieties and randomly growing them in this trial and tracking things like performance and yield. In our weed suppression trial, so this is that rotation I just mentioned, where we're taking a 4-year grain rotation and plugging in industrial hemp. We don't know a whole lot about industrial hemp, so there's not much record of how it was grown and things like that, and it hasn't been in over 50 years. So we know a lot has changed our soil and climatic conditions since then. And so we had to take a crop that we knew was used in a similar way as a weed suppression cover crop over the summer. So we're using sorghum Sudan grass. I just want to zoom in on this. So in year 1, right off the bat, we got a really nice visual here. And so you can see on the left side of the screen, you can see sorghum Sudan grass that was growing about 10 feet tall. You can see industrial hemp on the right that was growing about 12 feet tall. And in the middle there, that's your fallow plot. So that is things like pigweed, ragweed, lamb's quarter, foxtail. And so those are your major problem weeds getting upwards to 6 feet tall. And so that was really showing you what would have been growing in that field had it not been for the sorghum or the hemp. And I just want to take you into the hemp forest. And so that was also really a great visual for us to see in year 1. And so this is us collecting biomass samples. But if you look there on that floor in what I'm calling the hemp forest, you can see that there are no weeds growing there. And so just to delve a little bit more into the design of this study, we took a mixture of fiber, seed, and dual purpose varieties. This is only from one of the years, so we tested many more. We're up to 8 varieties now, each year testing between 3 and 5, depending on what we can get each year. And so we're doing a randomized design and looking at performance and yield. In our weed suppression trial, we're doing a similar thing. We're taking this rotation and we're doing a complete randomized block design. And so we're taking each of the crops, sorghum, hemp, and a fallow plot, and we're randomizing it throughout the field. And then following each season, the entire field will be planted to soybeans or wheat or corn to see the effect that having either sorghum or hemp in the rotation has on those succeeding crops. For data collection, we wanted to look at the varietal data. So in our variety trial mainly, we're looking at things like height and biomass. So that's plant performance. And that's really going to show you how effective this crop is as a cover crop. And we're also looking at yield, so both fiber yield and grain yield, as well as the nutrient and mineral data. For soil, we're looking at both soil physical and chemical properties. So for chemical, we really want to know, what does hemp require? What does it need? What is it pulling out of the soil? And for physical, that's going to give us an indication on how the effects that this no-till system is having. And for weed suppression data, so we're not only looking at the density, so it's the number of weeds in a given area during the season of hemp, but also during the seasons of the succeeding crops. But we're also conducting a weed seed bank analysis study. And so this is where we're collecting soil after every season. And we're looking at the long-term weed suppression effects. So taking the soil and forcing the weeds to germinate to see what seeds are still viable in that soil. And the thought is that there's a long-term suppression effect by incorporating weed suppression cover crops in your rotation. So the variety data, you can see it's as expected in year one. We saw an increase in we saw better performance in the fiber variety. It grew tallest and it produced the most biomass. But you can see here in terms of biomass, really anything over 8,000 kilograms per hectare is really a sufficient cover for a good weed suppression cover crop, and it's really going to hold on to your soil. So you can see that both our fiber and our dual varieties, as well, of course, as the sorghum Sudan grass, providing that biomass that's going to give the benefit of using it as a weed suppression cover crop. In year two, we definitely saw a decline. So this could be in part due to a loss of soil fertility, and that hemp just doesn't do well growing 2 years in a row, even though we did use a hairy vetch nitrogen fixing cover crop in between season 1 and season 2, as well as applied compost. We still saw a decline in height and biomass in year 2. It also could be due, as most of you know if you're from the Northeast, that we had the increased precipitation, more than double our average annual precipitation, and so that's definitely a factor as well. For plant tissue data, so this is total leaf tissue, total biomass, and they were analyzed for all macro and micronutrients as well as heavy metals. I just wanted to point out a few. So nitrogen, you can see that there's much higher content of nitrogen in the hemp varieties compared to the sorghum Sudan grass. And it was expected that there would be higher levels of nitrogen, in that we thought because of how tall it's growing, it is going to take up a lot more nitrogen. So we'll definitely want to continue to track those numbers. I also really want to point out at the end here, the cadmium and the lead. Those are heavy metals of concern. And you can see here that there's higher content of the cadmium and lead in our hemp varieties compared to our sorghum Sudan grass. And what's really interesting about this is that in our soil tests, there was no evidence of these heavy metals. Obviously, we know they had to have been there, but they were at levels so low that they were not detected by soil tests. So that means that not only is hemp mining for these heavy metals, it's also bioaccumulating them in its tissues. And so this is something that was hypothesized. We do know that hemp is commonly used as a bioremediation crop. So it's healing and cleaning soil in things like mining sites. And so this is evidence of that it is working as a bioremediation crop and pulling out those heavy metals. And of course, we do also want to track the fact that it is accumulating it in its tissues. And so, like I said, this is total leaf material. So it's not any part of a plant that you would be consuming. And so we're waiting on results for the grain and the fiber being tested separately for these heavy metals to see where the plant is moving them. For our grain yield, and so this is from a variety trial from year one. One thing I want to point out is that in year one, we wanted to treat all the varieties the same. I would say, I don't want to say ignoring the instructions given by the seed suppliers, but we really wanted to see how they were going to do here. And so we treated them all the same. We planted them all the same with our grain drill at 7.5-inch rows at 45 pounds to the acre. And so this is the results from that for our grain yield. And you can see here that our grain variety, the Kanda variety, did produce higher grain yield. But of course, going forward, we would probably want to, now that we know a little bit more about the cultivars, we might want to treat that one a little differently and maybe give it more space to branch out. Because really, if you take a grain variety and you grow it like a fiber, it's going to grow like a fiber and it's not going to produce as much grain. If you're not giving them the room to grow and branch out and produce flowers, they're going to grow tall and put more effort into biomass and fiber production. But one thing also to note is that after week 11, you can see the grain variety, it dropped off. And so this is really something we need to pay close attention to, because the directions given by the seed supplier is that this was a 110 to 120 day crop. And you could see at almost 80 days, not even, that we are already seeing a great loss and dropping in our grain. And so definitely paying closer attention to these varieties and growing them year after year to see how they're growing here and what their seasonality and production and harvest time looks like. For our weed suppression data, so this is in year 1. This is when we had the hemp side by side to sorghum. And when it says ryegrass, that's just a grass fallow plot. So there was grass planted in those plots. And so you can see here, both at mid-season and at harvest, which was around 85 days, that we did see a reduction in some of our major problem weeds like foxtail, pigweed, and ragweed in both the sorghum and the hemp plots compared to our fallow plots. And with ragweed, we actually saw a greater reduction of ragweed in our hemp plots. So hemp actually performed better at suppressing ragweed. In year 2, you can see in 2018, there were some spikes in the no-till. So those are the lighter colors. And when I say no-till or till, this is referring to whether we use tillage to establish the cover crop. And so in half the field, we directly drilled the rye cover crop into the hemp or sorghum stubble, which was then rolled down in the spring to plant our no-till soybeans. And so that would be the no-till plots. And then the tilled plots are that we plowed under the sorghum and the hemp stubble to drill in the rye cover crop, which then was rolled in the spring to plant the soybeans. So just to clarify, the till or the no-till is how we establish the cover crop, but all of the soybeans in all of the plots were no-till planted into the rolled down rye. And so I just wanted to point out here, our mustard, my little circles, there they are, they went away. That was one that came out that there were more mustards in the no-till plots. So the density was so low that we're not at much concern at this time. But I don't know if you noticed that there is no pigweed, ragweed, or lamb's quarter. And so this was really exciting to see that we saw a complete elimination of some of these major problem weeds. Now, some of that could be seasonality of the weeds themselves, but just the fact that there was no presence of these major problem weeds that are a problem year after year, we did not have them in year 2 in our no-till soybean system. I also wanted to point out these bars because I'm sure you could see that they have a fairly high density. And so this was smartweed. And you can also see that they were only in the complete no-till system. But at this time, we're not concerned about it. I'll tell you why. If you don't know anything about smartweed, it is a Pennsylvania aquatic plant. So I think that really just tells you how wet last year was. Now, it is an interesting story that they were only found in the no-till plot. So I definitely want to look more into that. I think that's going to tell us a lot more about the soil physical qualities. So, it could have also been location and where we had pooling of water in our fields. But I really just think that tells you how wet last year really was. And for any farmers in the Northeast, I'm sure you are all well aware of that. And so this is the typical habitat for smartweed. So we'll continue to monitor that, but I don't think we're that concerned about it at this time. Overall, we had low weed pressure in our no-till soybeans, as well as increased yields. And so this is a graph depicting what that looked like. And so this white dotted line is the national average of soybeans last year. And so you can see here in some of our plots we're well above that. And so that was really exciting to see. And this is not only compared to the national average, but also as well as other soybean yields on our farm. And so this is really great. Really anything above that 3,000 mark, which was pretty much all of them, is a great yield to see. And so we were really thrilled with that, especially in a year like last year, when we had such wet conditions that most farmers had a complete loss of soybean. In year 3, so we just harvested wheat last week, and so these results are very fresh. And so again, this is compared to last year's national average because we don't have this year's yet, but all of our averages were well above the average as well as what would be expected of wheat. And so we were really excited about that, especially for organic wheat production. So this national average is for all production, not just organic. And I don't yet have the results for the weed data for wheat analyzed, but overall it was very, very low. In some plots, we had almost no weeds. So overall, just to summarize a few of those main points, we saw that the fiber varieties were producing higher biomass and height. And so this is as expected. Excuse me. So this is as expected. You would expect that a crop that is meant to grow tall will produce a higher height and biomass. We saw that hemp was mining and accumulating heavy metals in its tissues, which means it's making it a viable bioremediation crop. But of course, we want to track and make sure it's not contaminating any end products. We saw that hemp suppressed foxtail and ragweed, some major agricultural nuisances, better than Sudan grass. Particularly, we were really excited to see the suppression of the foxtail. That's one that we have the most concern about when we go to try to harvest for grain, and because it gets really wrapped up in your combine. Our soybean and wheat yields following hemp were increased while weed pressure was reduced. And overall, for us, hemp was a viable weed suppression cover crop. That is hopefully of higher value than something like sorghum Sudan grass. Again, we talked about the potential of this crop for its many uses. And so we're hopeful that it also would create more profit. There were a lot of challenges doing this work. As you can imagine, working with a crop that had just become legal to start growing for research. And each year along this 3-year process, we've had different challenges. And so in the first year, really was about sourcing seed. Where do we even begin? Where are we going to get our seed from? We have to deal with all these clearances and this permitting, and this is something we hadn't had to do before. And then, of course, getting varieties, shipping from all over the world and worrying with germination issues. And also working around the fact that this is a crop that we know historically was mostly hand harvested. And so what machinery do we have to plant and to harvest? And how are we going to do that? We have almost no agronomic data on how to do this. And so, really going through the process of okay, now we got our seeds finally. The first year we didn't get them till July. We got our seeds, now what? How do we plant it? We had very little data on and information on how to plant it. And then it's in the ground, and in 80 days you're thinking about how you have to harvest it. So it's really quick. And then in year 2, the permit changed drastically. And so we had to work out all those changes and figure out, again, where are we going to get the seed from? And even companies that you had gotten them from in year 1 didn't even exist by year 2, and there was all kinds of issues there. And then the long-term storage. So, can you save seed? And then also, like I said, in the first year, we didn't get our seed until July. So it was sitting in customs for quite some time. And so, we don't know the storage conditions at that time. And then of course, by year 2, so year 1, we had to destroy any product we made. By year 2, we were able to harvest, but we had nowhere to process. So we were mostly growing for fiber, and there were no processing facilities. The closest processing facility in 2018 was in North Carolina. And at that point, you would have had to pay DEA fees at each state line to move the material. And also, this is a very heavy biomass. So really the cost of shipping to North Carolina, it just isn't worth that cost. So In that time, we again just had to compost our harvest because there was no processing. Year 3, so this was finally, it's unlisted as a Schedule I narcotic. We're able to cultivate it as a crop, but that led to other problems. And so now you have all these new seeds. One of them is you have all these new seed companies popping up, but none of these seeds are listed or certified. And it's, you know, who do you trust? Where do you get your seed from? And then also, because it was now unlisted and no longer under the jurisdiction of the DEA, we no longer were providing the import permits. So now those countries had to provide the export permits. And a lot of them didn't have the, you know, things set up to be able to do that seamlessly. And then also at this time, there is no federal regulation. It's still undecided how they're going to regulate this crop in terms of how it's cultivated and what products are coming out of it and how those are regulated. And so really the marketplace for industrial hemp, they're calling it the Wild West, and it really is at this time. We know we still have a lot to learn. This is just the very beginning of basically growing a new crop. Like I said, it's been a long time and there's not much record. Yes, we can take the information that countries in Europe and Canada have done, but however, we know our soil and climatic conditions are very different. And so really that changes a lot about the requirements of a crop. And so we really have a lot of work to do on that. We know we need to try more varieties, and we also need to start working on really creating our domestic varieties. In the United States, we've really taken a leap at doing this for our CBD varieties, but not so much for our industrial fiber and food varieties. So I'd really like to see that happen. We know we have to adjust things like planting date, harvest date, seeding rate, spacing. We want to make sure that the way we're growing a crop, we're getting the best product for whatever its intended use is. So for example, a fiber variety should have a higher fiber content than a seed variety, and vice versa. A seed variety should have a higher seed yield than a fiber variety. And so playing with all of those agronomic factors to kind of maximize their use. To increase farmer income, we want to learn a lot more about these dual purpose varieties. So what's so great about hemp? It's that it has all these uses. And so we really want to work more with these dual purpose varieties, because wouldn't it be great if you can take one crop, one harvest, and get 2 very different products out of it? And those 2 different products lead to thousands of other options for products. We know that we have to expand our research and cultivation to different soils and states. Of course, we're starting at the Rodale Institute on an organic farm that has been organic for over 70 years with organic matter above 7% in this field. And so we know that we need to try it in poor soils, in rocky soils, in sandy soils, acidic soils, et cetera, to really understand this and look at the differences for each variety. And we really need to do a better job of understanding the fertility requirements. At this time, industrial hemp is being compared to corn. We know this is not accurate, but it's the best we have at this time. So that's what we're doing this year. We have set up a nutrient management trial. And so this is mostly just tracking nitrogen at this stage because our results show a spike in nitrogen content. And so we're using blood meal as our pure nitrogen source. And then we're also using a compost only treatment because most organic farmers, you're going to go out, you're going to apply your compost, excuse me, and you're going to supplement with a treatment or a fertilizer. Overall, excuse me, overall, we want to look at the content and the quality of these grains. And then, of course, when things go really well, you, as a scientist, you don't believe it. So we're repeating this study on another site on our farm. We're getting a lot of chats here. Sorry if I keep like looking off to the side. It's because I keep getting pop-ups for chats and questions. We also are taking part in some CBD research. So right now, about 90% of US farmers are producing hemp for CBD production. And so we're working with our partners at the Pocono Organic, so at the Pocono Raceway. They have started an organic farm. The research is managed by Rodale Institute staff, as well as the farm itself, our farm manager. For the hemp research, we have about 2.5 acres for research and over 10 acres for production with partnership with Charlotte's Web. But one thing about CBD research is it requires a lot more hand labor and work, and really just more hands. You know, you're taking these plants and you're watching them one by one, ensuring that they're feminized, walking the field every day, scouting for males, hand harvesting for the most part, and processing and pressing yourself. And so we're really excited to use our veteran farmer training program. We have some folks up there that are living on site at the Pocono Raceway, and they're helping with a lot of this cultivation of both the hemp and the vegetable production up at the Pocono Raceway. So really excited about that program. If you don't know anything about it, definitely learn about it. And so going forward, we're definitely going to try to use that program more for the work that's happening up at our Pocono Organics farm. And so this is what it looks like. And for those of you that don't know, we have our triangular track there, and right by the entrance going into the raceway is the farm. And so that's really exciting because Poconos is a food desert. And so, you know, they don't have a lot of local access to produce, and most definitely not organic produce. And so that's really exciting to see. The design of this research, it's very similar to our nutrient management trial. So in this case, we're using a little bit of a different fertilizer that was designed for us for the CBD hemp, and it contains many different things. You know, CBD hemp requires a little bit more different, and you know, it requires obviously some nitrogen, but more phosphorus than the industrial varieties and other micronutrients, because you're producing this for a medicinal quality product. And so you definitely want more of those micronutrients in this product. And so this is a randomized split block design where we have 2 spacing treatments, 4 feet and 6 feet. And we have 2 mulch types, both black plastic and straw mulch. And we have 3 fertilizers. Really, we have 2 fertilizers. We have the compost only, and then we have the fertilizer that was created by our friends at Fertrell. And then we have a control plot, so no fertilizer. Obviously, we don't expect those to do so well, but you have to have a control plot in research. And so, you know, just for those of you that do not know, CBD production looks very different. So I mentioned in our industrial varieties, we're growing with a grain drill. We're growing them a lot like small grains, very tight, growing very tall. Whereas the CBD production looks a lot more like a vegetable system. You're growing it more like tomatoes. So you're growing on raised beds, maybe in black plastic, and you're spacing them pretty far apart. These plants are going to turn basically into giant bushes. And so they've been started and now they're in the field. I have a couple updated pictures, but I didn't get a chance to add them, but they are getting pretty big at this point. And so we're really excited about this, you know, with our partners at Pocono Organics doing the work up there, as well as the support from Charlotte's Web, like the largest hemp company in the country, and to kind of get this work going to make sure that we're taking part in this type of work as well. So we're really excited to see what happens there. Just by observation at this point, they are growing really well in the research area, and they're actually doing a lot better than the production area, so I'm really excited about that. And we're actually seeing really great results. Obviously, we're seeing more weed pressure in our straw treatment. We think that's because it was actually a mixture of hay and straw, but we won't argue with the farmer on that one. But overall, the plants are growing well. They're very, very large at this point. They're about 3 feet tall and about 1.5 feet wide. And actually, we're seeing really rapid growth in the black plastic compost treatment. So we're excited about that. Go Rodale Institute to compost. So we'll continue to monitor that. And really, this is a learning curve. One, we've never grown anything really on this land. So this was a parking lot before. And so just to get any yield at all, and then to see these plants growing into little trees, that's really exciting. So we're going to continue that work. Really, none of this work would be possible without our funders and our donors. So at this time, there isn't a whole lot of funding or grant funding for industrial hemp. A lot of agencies are still really scared because there isn't much regulation, especially federal funding sources. And so, you know, they're really not giving away money for hemp research. And really, if they see it, it's not something that they're going to fund. And there is some out there. They're very hard to find. And of course, they're going to be very competitive. The amount of growers has increased rapidly. I don't even know what number we're at, but I know we're well above 100 growers in this area. And so I'm sure we're well above that. We're in the first year, we only started with 15. And so really the support from these companies that are excited about this work, that's what makes it all possible. And of course the state or Department of Ag, they really did a good job at getting this pilot program started, as well as Pennsylvania was the second state to submit their plan to the USDA. And so it's good that we're up ahead and we're on track to be in a good place for when federal regulations get put in place. And so we're really excited about that. At this time, I would say if you have questions, I do see some coming up on the chat function, but if you have any questions, if you could refer them to the Q&A box, and I will go through all of those and we'll answer them as a group, and we'll go through some of the more general questions. If you have more specific questions, you can feel free to send that to info@rodaleinstitute.org. If you have questions about your farm, so for consulting services, about how you may incorporate industrial hemp into your rotation plan or during your transition to organic, please feel free to contact our farm consulting services and contact Sam there. At this time, I'm going to pull up our Q&A box and we'll have a nice discussion and start talking about these questions. And just to remind you, I cannot see you or hear you, but please send your questions to the Q&A. I will repeat them and answer them for the entire audience. Okay, our first question. If heavy metals are accumulating in the biomass and the hemp is rolled down and left as mulch for the subsequent crops, how does that serve in the longer run insofar as removing these heavy metals from the environment and soil? So in this case, we are not rolling the hemp because we're using hemp as a dual cover and cash crop. So we're rolling our other cover crops, so our rye and our vetch, to plant our soybean and our corn. But we are not at this time rolling hemp. Of course, we want to use it as a cash crop as well. So much like the sorghum Sudan grass that you would harvest as a forage, we are going to take pretty much the entire plant of hemp off of the ground and remove it for processing. Are the results of the trials publicly available, or are there plans to make them publicly available? Yes, I'm sorry, I should have included a link, but if you just go to the rodaleinstitute.org and go to our research tab, there's an entire page on industrial hemp, and within there is embedded a link for preliminary results, many of which I shared with you today. And there is a web article that I published this winter that has all of these results and findings at rodaleinstitute.org. How many acres of industrial hemp does Rodale Institute currently grow? Great question. So at this time, so this year we've doubled. We have our variety trial that we've now moved. We're going to plan on moving it every year since we did see that decline in year 2. So that trial is an acre with 4 hemp varieties randomly replicated in strips throughout that acre. We also have, and that's a mixture of fiber, seed, and dual purpose varieties. And then we're going to switch up the varieties every 2 years. And then in our weed suppression trial, we're continuing our first weed suppression trial. So that was the one with the 4-year rotation. So now we're in year 3. We just harvested our wheat. Next, we'll go in vetch, and we'll end with corn. And so that'll be the completion. Next year, we'll complete the rotation. But we also started it over in another field this year. So that trial was an acre, and we have another acre starting over with hemp and sorghum side by side. And then we have our nutrient management trial, which is using our grain variety, Canda, that we used in all 4 years, really. And that one we're growing just for grain harvest and in our nutrient management trial. And that trial is also an acre. We try to keep it small with research. You're doing replicated plots and having to collect a lot of samples. And so most of our trials will try to keep around that 1 acre. So currently we have the 4 1-acre trials. And then on our CBD side at our Pocono Organics farm, we have 2.5 acres for research and 10 acres for production. What are the best machines for pre and post harvest of 5 acres of high CBD hemp? Well, really, this is going to depend on how you're growing. Like I said, for us, we're growing it in raised beds in black plastic and raised straw mulch beds. And so for us, there are some machines that can come through and cut your plants, but you're still having to collect them. And you also have to hang them to dry for quite some time. So you also need the storage facility to be able to dry them. Up at our site, we're just going to use our hoop houses that will be shut off to dry them. And then for post-harvest, I don't know a whole lot about post-harvest. And so for this, we're definitely going to try to press ourselves. We're going to bring in a company who's already doing it and work with them. So I can't really answer much about the post-harvest or the pressing for CBD, but you can contact the Institute, the info at rodaleinstitute.org, and we can send you to the right people to tell you a little bit more about how that process will go. Let's see. I think those are all the general questions I see at this time. If you have any more, I'll hang on for a few more minutes, and feel free to please send any more questions my way. And then, of course, don't forget to, if you have any more questions or want to talk more about this, you can check out our website or email us at the info@rodaleinstitute.org, and we can have more of a discussion, and I can also send you to the right people to answer some of these more specific questions. We have here, what equipment were you using for planting and harvest in the industrial trials? So we were using a grain drill at 7.5-inch rows. We used the sorghum setting on the grain drill because, of course, there isn't a hemp one, and that's how we were planting. And of course, in our trials, when we were using the roller crimper, we had in planting our other grains, we had a roller crimper on the front and our larger grain drill on the back, our monosem grain drill for planting the corn and the soybean. And so that actually is a really nice system because they kind of balance each other out in terms of the wheat. But one modification we had to make to our grain drill for planting the hemp is we had to put a couple rings around the hydraulic system so that it was planting it at a lower depth. We planted only about between 1/4 and 1/2 inch deep. So you're really having to have that smooth surface before putting down your hemp seed, because a lot of them are laying on the surface. For harvest, so we tried to harvest with our combine for grain, but however, I think I mentioned in year 1, we treated them all the same. So really our seed variety still got upwards to 6 feet tall, and it was way too woody to use our combine for, and ended up getting very bound up. And so we stopped that right away. And then we ended up harvesting them all for fiber. We used a sickle bar mower And then we use a tedder to spread it out. We let them field rot, so basically rotting, to separate the outer fiber, the bast fiber, from the inny woody herd. So we let that rot in the field for 3 weeks, and you want it to get rained on and dry out and do a series of that. And then, so we tedded it about 3 times. And then we used a baler and we harvested and we rolled them into round bales. This year, we did plant our grain in our nutrient management trial spaced out more, so it's not quite as tall, it's still green, it's not quite as woody. So we're very hopeful that we'll be able to use a simple combine for this. In this case, you want a combine that is able to have a hydraulic lift to raise up its header to harvest your grain. And then in many cases, if you want to get all the biomass off the ground, or you're using it for a dual purpose variety, you're going to have a header that lifts up, as well as a sickle bar mower underneath cutting the rest. And so that's a typical type of equipment you will see. It's definitely more helpful if you can modify the equipment you already have, because some of these pieces of equipment that are doing it all seamlessly are well above $500,000 to $1 million. So at this time, they're not really available to everyone. So a lot of people are just modifying the equipment they already have to make this happen. And so for fiber processing, though, the processors do want them in bales. And so that's pretty simple for a lot of farmers who are already doing hay production. It doesn't require any other special equipment. And then one thing I'd like to note, just for advice, for those of you who are interested in growing, definitely think about your already existing farm plan. Think about what equipment you already have, what system are you already practicing, because that's really going to help you. There, of course, are going to be added costs with a newer crop, and the seed is a little bit higher. It's not too bad. You're seeing about $1 to $3 a pound for industrial varieties, but for your seaweedy varieties, you're seeing up to $3 a seed. I mean, most are about $1 a seed. And so, of course, that's a very different cost. And then, you know, with harvesting, you have different pieces of equipment. And so really thinking about the plan you already have, the equipment you have, space you have, and then also making sure you already have relationships and a contract with a processor before you put any seed in the ground. That's also going to be really important because there is still very limited processing. And so that's usually my advice when starting, because as I've mentioned, you know, it does require very different machinery and harvesting techniques for the different intended end use. All right, we'll give it another 5 minutes here. If anyone has any other burning questions, I will definitely answer those for you. Next question, how much of a profit does the Rodale Institute make off of industrial hemp, if any? So at this time, we haven't actually harvested foreign end products. So in year one, it was required to destroy the product. In year two, we definitely saw those declines and we didn't have the proper machinery to harvest. So again, we composted. I could say we put it in the compost pile. Actually, hemp takes a long time to compost. So it still hasn't broken down, but that's what we had to do in the first 2 years. Last year, we had a few relationships set up with people wanting to look at the material and do some research on it. And the same thing with this year. So what we did harvest, we either composted or just gave away. So we haven't tried to make any profit off it. And then also, of course, there were no processing facilities. So we're growing mostly fiber, and we did not have a decorticator in the state. And so we weren't able to process. So this year, we're hoping to do a mixture of collaborations for people to test the quality, to give us a better idea of potential profit, as well as attempt to harvest a grain crop this year. So we're really excited to do that, and we'll see what we get. But at this time, we haven't been able to harvest, so we don't have much on the side of profit. And really, we just want to get some answers and work with these processors to see what the costs look like and what the return looks like. But we're definitely not trying to attempt to make a profit off it. We just want to provide the answers for all of you. I really appreciate all of your time and everyone staying tuned in while we wait on some questions. And then again, of course, if you have any more questions, look forward to answering those for you offline. And also, I'm hoping to have updated results after our first trials wrap up. So next year, I'm hoping to have more of a full web article with more properly analyzed results and posted by the end of next year. And we're hoping that will also lead to a peer-reviewed publication that we'll be able to share and link in with all of you. One more question, how does the price of industrial hemp seed compare to sorghum Sudan? I don't know that I could answer that for you unless you guys already know the cost of sorghum Sudan grass. I definitely, if you ask me at the info at Rodale Institute, I could send you to the people who order seed for us. But I do believe that it's a little bit higher, but still for industrial hemp, for the fiber varieties, you're really only looking at $1 a pound. So I don't think it's any astronomical cost for industrial varieties. And then of course that compares very differently to your CBD varieties where you're looking at about $1 a seed. In that case, most farmers are going with clones. All right, we have a few more questions here. We are planting about, for the industrial varieties, we're planting 45 to 50 pounds per acre. And for the grain varieties, we're planting about 35 pounds to the acre. We have a question here about irrigation. And so for our industrial varieties, we are not using any irrigation. Hemp is very drought tolerant. It does require a little bit of precipitation in the first couple weeks until you get to that boot stage. So in year one, we didn't have to deal with that. Right when we planted, we got 2 weeks of rain, and so that was perfect, and they grew really tall. In year two, of course, we had rain the entire time. But they're actually right after we planted the one variety, we had a 2-week drought. I know that doesn't seem possible, but last year we did have 2 weeks without rain. So we just used an overhead sprinkler system to get those started. But for the most part, for your industrial varieties, if you're timing it with your seasonality and your precipitation, depending on where you're growing, hemp is very tolerant to drought. Now for the CBD variety, we're growing in a vegetable system in a raised bed with black plastic, and so we're using drip irrigation in that case. And so I'll hang on here for a few more minutes. If you have any more questions, please send them through the Q&A function. And if not, of course, email us at info@rodaleinstitute.org, and I will answer those questions. Or I'll connect you with the right people to answer those questions. I really appreciate you guys tuning in today and learning about industrial hemp. It's really exciting to start this. Like I said, we're really at the beginning stages of this, figuring out how to grow it, if we can grow it, and then ultimately figuring out what that means. We want to really look at the services that this crop is providing to our farm, as well as to our farmers and their overall income. So, we're really excited this year to get into harvest and processing and being able to tell you a little bit more about what that might look like in terms of profit. And yes, this webinar will be available online later. And so you can go onto our website under our webinars and you will find this. And so if you want to listen again, or if you got on late and missed a few things, feel free to watch our webinar later. It will be posted. Right, looks like we have some people logging off. Feel free, if you have any more questions, to send them my way. We're just really excited to be working with this crop because, as most of you know, I'm sure, there hasn't been anything new for farmers in a while. So, bringing this crop that obviously we know is historically old, but has all of this new potential. And it's really exciting. And it's kind of creating a new spark and interest in farming again. And it's really important for a lot of reasons. I mean, we're bringing this crop to be able to have you use it to increase your crop diversity and build your soil. And hopefully improve your income as a farmer. But it's just sparking interest overall. I think the thing I'm most surprised about is that I get calls from people all the time who say, I've never farmed a day in my life, but hemp is exciting. And I think I want to grow hemp. Of course, I start with a caution and say maybe, let's start small and work on a contract with a processor and all of those good things. But I think that's been what's the most surprising to me, is this overall interest, even from people who've never farmed a day in their life. And that's going to be really important, of course, right? Because we know that we need to create this new generation of farmers and for younger generations to get excited about farming. And I think that this crop has the potential to do that, to bring that interest. You see hemp everywhere, and we've seen the interest in our communications and our media on hemp. And obviously with all of you that joined in today, this was a well-attended webinar. So, to see this interest, I think, is really exciting. It gives a lot of hope for farmers. And we're really hoping to be able to use this and to provide these answers. So it's another tool for farmers, and specifically for organic farmers, to be able to make that transition or to sustain, any costs that they see, to be able to make a profit from this crop. We know it has the potential to do that. There are companies all over that are getting that profit. And so we're really excited about that. Let's see here. Are you doing any direct sow on your CBD trial? And if so, how many germ emergence rates have been on those plants? And so we are not doing any direct seeding, but we did actually start all of our seedlings from seed, and we were told that it was going to be about 20% germination, and we ended up getting 93%. So that's really exciting. Most of those we transplanted into our beds with a water wheel transplanter. Some of them we are keeping in pots in a controlled environment in the hoop houses, and then some were growing outside on mesh, black mesh, and seeing how that does as well. And so we're trying a couple different systems because we had expected to get a lot less plants, and we have 10 times what we had planned for, so that's really exciting. So we're trying different things with it, but we didn't directly sow any into the ground. There's a few reasons for that. They say it's feminized, but you're still going to have about 10% male. So really being able to keep track of every individual plant is essential. And so we want to make sure we're growing them in a system where we're able to do that and keep track of that. And then of course you have the cost. So every individual seed, if it's worth $1 to $2, you want to take care of every individual little seed. So yeah, I think starting from transplants is your best bet for CBD production. But overall, we were really surprised with the emergence rates we saw. We only tried one variety, so of course I can't speak to others, but that was pretty great. Thoughts on compost tea and how to make it. We have done a lot of work with compost tea for many reasons. I personally don't have any thoughts on it because I haven't used it in any of our trials or in this trial. And of course, for us, we have a large scale production of compost, and so we're using that compost that was produced. But if you send me an email at the info@rodalinstitute.org, I can get you in touch with our compost production specialist, and I'm sure he would love to tell you all about compost tea. We still have a lot of people signed on here. We are past our 3 o'clock. Sorry, I'm in Arizona, so my time's a little off. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to ask them through the Q&A. If not, thank you so much for joining, and feel free to contact via email. I'll hang on for another minute here. But I do have to get back to the conference and talk to more people about this awesome plant. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to log off, and I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.